And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner, and today I am super excited to have Jennifer, excuse me, I don't know where that came from, Michelle Hazen joining us live. We are talking about book coaches this month, and Michelle is a book coach and has a fascinating story. And I thought she would be a great person to kick off this kind of month long discussion about book coaches. And Michelle is a storied character on her own. Reading over her bio and hearing about her is has been a great joy, and I know that she's going to bring something special to the show today. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Hi, Hank. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Michelle, we have a new segment that we are starting. That I've got a couple of questions that I want to ask you, and just get the answer right off the top of your head. Don't think about it too much, but just a couple of questions to kind of get us started to get the conversation juices flowing. One question that I love to ask people is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh man, if you went to my house, my mom would sit you down and pull out of the safe a three-page short story bound in ribbons of
Nice.
it's the Emperor, and it's like, yeah, it's 3 pages. It's this girl falling in love. There's a couple of twists. It's very feminist for like a 6 or 7 year old to have written. So I was proud of that. But no, mostly I remember. I think that might have been the only thing that I finished until the end of college. Mostly, I really like to write lists of characters and their horses, and then never actually write the book. So that's where I started at.
But we've got an inventory of the horses, and I
There was a
get
lot
it.
of detail on the horses. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. I get it. Next question. Do you believe in writer's block? And if so, how do you get unstuck?
Oh, I believe in it. I've seen it plenty.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, when I very first started book coaching, I wanted to specialize in busting writer's block. But the weird thing is, people don't go looking for editors when they're in writer's block. They go to Twitter to procrastinate and pretend that they're not in writer's block. And so
Mm,
it's a little bit of a audience issue, is trying to get your hands on people who have writer's block, because they're often not actively looking for editors, because they don't realize anybody can help them until
mm,
they have written something. And that's
right.
actually the best segue you could have given me to why you need a book coach, which is that an editor is to help you make the best piece that you can once you already have a full book written or a full
Yeah.
piece written. And a book coach is the person that can help you get to where you have that book written in the first place. All of the hard stuff that comes in between in terms of mindset, emotional issues, getting sat down to write, accountability, support, and teaching you writing craft stuff so that you know how to do it before you get to the point where you've already done it.
Love it. We're going to put a pin in that, and we're going to come back to that in just a minute.
Good, because
But
I have a lot more things to say
I,
about writer's
I'm
block.
and I want to listen and absorb what you have to say about it. But this next question, this is going to be the final one of our kind of speed round. What is the best piece of writing advice you ever got from anyone, and did you act on
That's a tough one for the speed round.
it?
That's a tough one for the speed round because I don't have a pithy piece of writing advice that
Yeah,
I've gotten off the top of my head. Um, but I will give you one of my most often pieces of given advice to others, which is do not connect your writing with your identity.
I like that. I like that. So when a lot of people think um, that they have to, and maybe one of the um, sometimes one of the worst piece of writing advice is that I hear people spout all the time is write what you know. And I think people misinterpret the sentiment behind that, and they feel like they can only write things that they have experienced. And a lot of times writing is about things that you never will experience. That's part of the fantasy of writing, is being able to be someone else for a while.
Yeah, that's a nuanced topic. And I
It
get
is.
people all the time that are like, when can I call myself a real writer? And they're really engaged in wanting to know, when are they a real writer? When do they qualify? Way and say, you know, you're more than a writer.
Yeah.
Today, right now, you're more than just a writer. You know, maybe you're a husband, maybe you're a bicyclist, maybe you're a champion crocheter, you know, maybe you're a person who absolutely loves apples. You're always more than one thing, and you should always remember that you're more than an author and more than your accomplishments. You know, like maybe
Yeah.
today you've written your first post-it note, and in 10 years you're going to be on the New York Times bestseller list. And on both of those days, you're a lot of other things than a writer.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And you'll be healthier the more you think of it that way.
Right. Right. Okay. The flip side of that question is, what is the worst piece of writing advice that you were ever given, and did you act upon it?
I really hate write every day
Yeah.
because I think we all have very busy lives. And also, I got a little bit of carpal tunnel. And
Mhm.
so, you know, write every day, like calm down with your, like, was that advice given by carpal tunnel surgeon? I don't know. Um,
Probably.
I, I do think that there's a real magic to consistency and momentum in writing. When you're writing more often than you're not, it's easier to get back into your piece. You get deeper into your piece. More things will pop up in your head spontaneously from your characters. So that momentum and consistency, there is really something to that. And I've worked a lot with my clients on different cheater shortcuts to
Yeah.
get that same momentum and magic that you get from writing every day or doing a NaNoWriMo style push when you have a busy life. You know, you have 3 kids and one of them's in soccer and one of them's in horse showing, and your husband just got a kidney transplant, and you have a day job, and you know, maybe need to work out some point in your life before you're 80. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Like, there are a
Yeah.
lot of things that most people are juggling. And so I think it's cruel to be like, write every day, to people when you don't know what their other responsibilities and commitments are. So I'm always working to try to get that same momentum and consistency to people in a way that meshes with actual real life a little bit
Yeah.
better. So we can talk
Right.
about those tricks later if you want.
Sure, sure. And one thing that I learned around that was that writing time for me doesn't necessarily mean sitting down at the keyboard. A lot of times it's me walking the dog and thinking, and just having a minute to ponder and to roll over ideas in my mind. And to me, I accomplish so much more in those times, a lot of times, than me sitting at the keyboard. And what I figure out there, I come back to the keyboard and make notes of. But both of those places are writing for me.
Oh, Hank, you just cued me in to think of the piece of good writing advice that I could use. Okay, Mackie Steveotter, who is a young adult author with an
Okay.
unspellable last name. So
Yep.
Google her immediately. You'll fail because it's unspellable. But her blog is great if you can figure out the spelling thing. And she's just so wonderful. She gave this advice once, like, there's a very frequently asked question. I'm sure you've seen it before, where it's like, how do I get any writing done when I have a day job, or like, you know, I
Yeah.
don't have enough time to write? How do I do that? And she said, I wrote one of my books when all I had was 2 hours on Wednesday nights for the whole book. And I wrote it pretty, like, I think she said 3 or 4 months, like pretty fast.
That's amazing
It is amazing. And it was
for
a good
Wednesday
book.
night writing.
Yeah. And again, when you only have 2 hours and you're only writing once a week, you're probably going to spend 45 minutes to an hour of that just getting back in the flow and remembering
Right.
what's happening in your book. So her trick was, if you're working on your book in your mind a lot of the time, like really actively, not just like, oh, you have a stray thought about it, but like really
Mhm.
actively working on it in your mind when you're not at the keyboard, then when you sit down, that's just typing time. You've got
Right.
it all sorted out. And there's so many moments in life where our bodies are engaged, but our minds aren't. You know, when you're like sitting in a work meeting and your boss is droning on about something that you don't need to know about, when you're in traffic, when you're doing dishes, when you're taking a shower, like, those are all great moments to be working on your book. And I had a job once as a tortoise biologist where they didn't allow us to have notebooks, and we weren't allowed to like write anything in our phone or have anything like that. And we just had to like walk around looking at the ground for 11 hours straight, which was very boring. And I had a book in my head at that moment that was like doing the thing where it is killing you to not be able to write it down.
Right.
And so what
Right.
I did is I would replay the scenes in that book over and over and over again. This was later my trad pub debut, Unbreak Me. So you can check me on this if you think that I'm lying. But the scenes for that book came through more vivid than I would argue probably any of my other books, just because I had rolled them over in my head so many times,
Right.
and I would feel like I knew what the scene was, but I would just keep playing it in my head, listening to the dialogue, even past when I could have probably written it, because I was bored and I had, 9 more hours in the day to look at dirt. Um, and what I found was they really came out more vivid. There was a lot of sensory detail. There was a lot less revision and layering needed on those scenes. And so even if you don't have anything new to work on in your head for your book, even if you're like, I know what my next scene is, but I just don't have any typing time to write it down, just play it in your head. Try to get deeper in your scene. Feel what your character's body feels like. Look around. What's behind them in the scene? What's the
Right.
weather that day? What are they wearing? Like, get deeper into that moment, and those details will come through in your scene and make it feel more realistic. So that is my good writing advice from
I
Maggie
love it.
Stiefvater.
I love it. See, I knew we would get there. We just, sometimes you just have to run around the question to get to the right. See, I knew
Yeah,
you could
yeah.
do it.
Thanks
Um,
for the prompt.
of course, of course. Um, I've found that that sometimes when you sit down at the keyboard every day, like if you follow that advice, you need to have a writing session every day. Um, Sometimes I will write a scene and completely miss the point. Where if I would have given myself a day or two to think about it, and that whole process that you're talking about, walk around looking at the dirt for 11 hours, reprocessing and processing. Then when you sit down at the keyboard, all of all of the things that scene could be have it's gone through all the revisions in your mind, and it comes out the best way that it could. And I guess that,
Yeah.
through revisions, you probably can get there too. But there's just something about pausing, giving yourself a little time, trusting your brain enough to, like, I know you're going to figure this out. I'm going to give you the space and the time to do it. And then when I come back, I'm just the stenographer that's just going to take the notes of the work that you've already done.
Yeah, I mean, writing isn't whitewater rafting. You don't have
Yeah.
just one task to do the whole thing right or wrong. It's layering. And you can do that layering in your head before you sit down and do the typing to write the scene, or you can do the layering after you've typed the scene and you're revising, or you can do a little bit of both. The layering can happen at any time in that process. But that was an important mind switch for me because I used to really hate revision because I thought of it as you did it wrong and now you need to fix it. And
Right.
instead, it's more like layering on top of what you've already done.
Yeah. I love that idea of layering, because over the last probably year, I have honed my revision process, and I got this idea from a friend of mine, that he calls it onioning. That if just like ogres, onions and stories have layers. That he kind of writes a dirty draft and then goes back to the top and goes through and adds more detail, and then goes back and adds more detail, and then scenes will change, and you just kind of, the process of going back through adds depth and layers, and um, you know more onion skin to it, and
Hmm.
so I like that idea. Um, Before we get into book coaching and what it is, because I'm really excited to kind of explore what a book coach is. I've never worked with a book coach before, so I'm very intrigued. But a little bird lover told me that you got your start writing fan fiction. Is that correct?
Oh, I sure did. I was at one of those tortoise biology jobs that I was just talking about, and there's so much time to get bored in tortoise biology. You're either staring
Yeah,
at the dirt looking for a tortoise, or you're driving around in front of construction crews looking for tortoises. And at those times, you're pretty focused. But
yeah,
there is so much time in construction when you're sitting around. Like if you've ever hired a contractor to work on your kitchen, you know how much sitting around waiting time there is. And so I started writing Vampire Diaries fan fiction because I was reading like a book a day in all this downtime and it was too expensive. And so I had to just start writing books. And then Amazon made it legal to sell fan fiction for a few
right.
fandoms, like 5 seconds later, where they would get the contract with the fandom holder. And if your fandom holder had signed the contract, you could sell fan fiction for money. And so I like published 8 books of Vampire Diaries fan fiction and sold just an obscene amount of copies of them. It was very fun. And then that Amazon branch went under and my 8 published books vanished. and I went back to start. So it's been a weird journey where like I had 8 books out and then I didn't have 8 books out. And then I had an indie published book out and then I took it down. And then I had
Mm.
real indie published books and then a trad pub debut. So I've debuted like 4 times or something. It's awful. But I love fan fiction and I love working with fan fiction authors because I feel like that's writing in its purest form where people are
Yeah.
just the most excited to write and you get to post it immediately to an audience that's just as excited about those characters in that world as you. And it also gives you just such a beautiful playground to play with all the different elements of writing in isolation. You know what I mean? You don't have to
Mhm.
write in any standard format or length. You can take elements from the show or the book that you're writing fan fiction about, or you can create all new stuff. Like there's no rules. They'll let you do whatever. It's awesome.
What are the biggest misconceptions about fanfic writing, or about the I don't know, subgenre is not really a right word. It's kind of this community of its own. And I think people, when people hear fan fiction, they immediately go to some preconceived notions that honestly they just derived on their own, because I think very few people take the time to kind of investigate what it is exactly. What do you think
The
people
first two
get wrong?
preconceptions that I run into the most often are that it's bad and that it's all porn. And neither one of
Uh,
those is correct. And
okay.
actually, I've been reading fan fiction since
See, that's not the first
20.
place I would have gone, but okay,
Really?
I
Where would
I
you have
believe
gone?
you. I I just think that um and this is not what I think now, but when I first heard of it, I knew someone who wrote fan fiction for this like Law and Order, and I just thought that's so weird. Like, why would you just not write a police procedural of your own? Like, I just didn't understand. And now
Sometimes you're just inspired for that particular world. Like Vampire
yeah,
Diaries, I swear to God, that show is written as a fan fiction prompt because they would have these great plot setups and then they would squander
yeah.
them every time. It's like they were trying to get me to fix them.
Mm,
Um,
that's so
or you're
funny.
really inspired for those particular characters and you don't want to
Right.
write a different enemies to lovers. You want to write that enemies to lovers, you know? But people, I definitely get a little tee-hee and think that it's all sex, which is not true. There is some sex in fan fiction. There's some sex in romance novels, whatever. Calm down. It's not all about that. And then the idea that all fan fiction is bad and like, you know, there's no gatekeepers. So there is bad stuff out there. There's good stuff out there. Like the one that I'm reading right now, I told my husband, if literary novels did what they were supposed to do and
Yeah.
actually had a plot, but also had absolutely glorious writing and really subtle symbolism and stuff, the fan fiction I'm reading now would be at the top of the heap. Like she is better than any literary novel I've ever seen. And then there's this other fan fiction author over in the Six of Crows fandom where she's
Yeah.
inventing multiple languages for her fan fictions
Oh,
and like
wow.
has just depth of culture that the canon never had, like in terms of you know, like cultural rituals and festivals that she's
Yeah.
invented to like support her story. Just like the layering and detail is insane. And when I was younger, I used to be like, oh, you guys are so good, you should go publish. And now I'm like, oh, you guys are so smart. You're doing all the fun parts and you're an incredible writer and you don't have to deal with any of the nonsense or waiting of publishing. You can just be happy and have a great audience. Like,
I
no
wonder if
notes.
any speaking of Six of Crows, I wonder if Lee Bardugo has reached out to them or has incorporated any of their work into her world. That
I
seems like
know a
that would
lot
be
of
a
authors
great.
won't read fan fiction because they're afraid of being accused of that. And I
Oh,
think all of
true,
them
true,
would actively avoid using any idea that they saw in fan fiction
true.
if they saw it because they would feel like they were plagiarizing, right?
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Which is fair.
So you had a path from writing fan fiction into writing uh your own fiction, shall we say, because you had this Amazon path where you could publish those.
Yeah, so
And
I did get a tryout publishing before I started writing or
right.
before I stared publishing original fiction, which most people don't have that experience.
Right, right. It sounds like you had there was a you could trace that path where step led to this, which led to that, and a lot of people don't. They're writing in this comfortable spot, and then all of a sudden, to publish, they've got to put away everything that they've accomplished so far and start over from scratch. And I think that's a hurdle for a lot of people.
They do, but then there's also the kind of gray area where you kind of file off the serial numbers and post your
Right.
fan fiction as original fiction. And especially if you're writing AU fan fiction, alternate universe. So for
Hmm.
instance, if I was writing Walking Dead fan fiction, but I took out all
Uh-huh.
the zombies, it would automatically be different enough that you'd
True.
be most of the way there. Or if you're writing, let's say, an enemies to lovers like Veronica Mars, and then you just take similar characters in an enemies to lovers, and maybe now they're not a detective and a rich boy, maybe now they're a cop and a movie star.
Yeah.
um, but you do something similar enough that you can enjoy the same thing that brought you to that fan fiction, but original enough that you can make it your own thing, and not be constrained with the plots or what's going on in the show. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Make up your own plot and your own. And like I said, in the fan fiction world, people are as creative as they want to be. I think that's another misconception, is that it's derivative, but you can
Yeah.
borrow as little or as much as you want from
Yeah.
the show when you're writing fanfic.
One of the things that I love to hear writers talk about is the circuitous route that they take in getting to writing and publishing. Uh, I've done over 2,000 author interviews over the last decade and a half, and I can count on one hand the amount of writers who writing and publishing was their sole pursuit. They go to college, they get an MFA, they never work any other jobs. Their sole pursuit is publishing this book, and probably a handful out of 2,000 um, have had that experience. Most people, like you, are turtle biologists, and they are, they work at retail at the mall, or they're, linemen on the power company. They're just all sorts of people from do all of these things, and they collect all of these life experiences that show up in their writing, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, maybe a lineman for the power company. I don't know why he's on my mind today.
I don't know,
This
but
guy,
I wrote a book about me as a tortoise biologist in a romance novel who fell in love with a lineman. So I feel like you're on topic.
maybe I have that fact in the back of my head for some reason, but I just have this idea of a guy hanging on a power pole thinking about writing fantasy novels all day, and he's a wizard,
Yeah.
but
Uh-huh.
he's working with electricity, but he's dreaming of magic or whatever. Um, so there, I just love to hear all of the experiences people gather in life and all the little things that they add to their writer toolkit that then they can pull back on later in
Mine
life.
is actually weirder than that in terms of
Okay,
how I got into
lay
writing.
it
I
on
don't know
me.
how long of a version you want, because I've got a
We're
lot of different versions of my
we're
bio.
we're here for the story.
Okay, so I was writing the fan fiction, and then
Okay.
I got to publish the fan fiction with Amazon Kindle World. And then I got like literally out of nowhere got a call from a New York publishing house. This never happens. Like this is a fantasy dream that people have in their heads that doesn't
Yeah.
happen. And they called me and they were like, "We've read your fan fiction on Kindle World, and it's like the top selling Kindle World's fan fiction. And so we want to hire you to write a series of books that goes along with the originals, which is the spin-off TV series. It's a
Hmm.
spin-off of the Vampire Diaries, because they were like,
Right.
we want you to use your name because you're well known in the fandom." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And so they wanted to hire me to write this book to go along with the originals. It was set in New Orleans, because the originals is set in New Orleans, and it was like a historical vampire novel. And so I started researching the history of New Orleans and found out that New Orleans is basically a foreign country plopped into America. It has a
Yes.
completely separate cultural history from every other town in America, and it's a little bit older than most
Yeah.
of America is. It's about 300 years old, not 200 years old.
Right.
And I ended up not taking that contract because I wasn't pleased with the style of prose they wanted, and I wasn't pleased with the plot they wanted, and I wasn't pleased with the level of historical detail they were letting me include. And so I chose to back out of that contract. But I fell in love with New Orleans, and I went there because I'd been hired for those books to see the town that I'd read about. And while I was there, first of all, while I was there, I got the call from my agent and signed with my agent on that trip. And then I wrote a book set in New Orleans based on that inspiration that later became my trad pub debut. But in between, I self-published 6 books, a 6-book series, and then so I
Wow.
debuted as an indie author, and then debuted again when she sold my Trad Pub book to a editor who read it while on a trip in New Orleans, and had my first call with my editor when I was on another trip to New Orleans 2 years later. So New Orleans is like my fairy godmother of my writing career. Like it just keeps coming back around the longer you trace it.
That's so
It's
funny.
it's delightful, but it's interesting how that fan fiction drove all of that, right? It
Yeah.
led to me being published for my fan fiction. It led me to being published for later books. It gave me an early experience that allowed me to stick to my guns and play hardball in a lot of creative calls where I realized if I wasn't willing to put my real name on something creatively that I could be proud of, it was okay to walk away, even from money and big opportunities, which I did very, very early
Yeah.
in my time and have continued to do all through my career. Although I do a little bit wish I would have started under a pen name so that I had a little bit more flexibility to have a different name that I'm editing under versus writing under.
Yeah.
I got really stuck on using my real name because I was like, I'm not going to put out anything that I'm not proud of. You know what I mean? Regardless
Yeah.
of what my editor says, regardless of what anybody else says, I have to be proud of it first. I don't care
Right.
if you think it's good. I care if I think it's good.
Right.
So I do wish I would have had a pen name so I could be a little bit more flexible with genre and different things like that. But other than that, I have no regrets. But yeah, weird path into writing,
Yeah.
all around weird path.
I love it. I live about 2 hours from New Orleans and,
Where?
in South Mississippi.
Okay.
And there are, New Orleans is a different world, but it's interesting how New Orleans has its tentacles, that kind of spread out around New Orleans, where it's a different place. But if you know what to look for, you can see the influence of New Orleans, all in the
I
surrounding
know
area. Yeah,
it has a more distinct culture than our entire country. It's
it
ridiculous.
does.
I've
It
set
does.
3 different books there. I've gotten many book ideas from that city. Like it's just rains book ideas on my head when I'm there.
Yeah. So you have all of these amazing experiences getting into writing, publishing your works, having a trad pub debut mixed with an indie pub debut, a Kindle Worlds debut, all of this going on, and
And I
somewhere
got
in
my
there,
agent before I did the indie publishing stuff, which is also weird.
that's wild. That's wild. Nobody else has that story. We should do another show one day just to unpack all of that. That sounds like so much fun. But somewhere along the way, book coaching and editing come in as well. How did you get involved in these aspects?
That actually has a really fun origin story too. You're asking all the right questions. So, do you remember what Pitch Wars was?
Yes, yes.
So, Pitch Wars, for people that aren't familiar, was a mentoring contest on Twitter back in Twitter's heyday. And so, it was right after I got my agent.
I have
I
to.
know somebody just commented they went to New Orleans thanks to Anne Rice's vampire books. I went and looked at a couple of her houses and read those books because I was so
Oh
fascinated
yeah,
by the culture.
yeah, yeah.
But
And
anyway, so
I interviewed Anne a couple of years before she passed, and such an amazing character. I could have talked to her all day long. She was amazing.
that's so cool. So
Yeah.
yeah, anyway, Pitch Wars was this mentoring contest where writers who wanted to get an agent would compete for the chance to be mentored by an agented and or published author. And
Hmm.
so you play agent for a day. They send you query letters, you pick through them to see which books you like, you do partial requests and full requests, you read the books, you decide which one you want to mentor. And I did it for a few different years. Sometimes I was picking through 60 uh, different options for books. By the time I was done, I was picking through like 250 options for different books, and then just picking one to overhaul and mentor. And I loved that program like nobody's business. I loved it so much. It was so fun to play agent and pick the most promising book. It was so fun to think about what each book needed and how to make it even better because there were so many that I loved, that really grabbed me, but then something would fall apart toward the end. Like you could tell they weren't quite to where they could get an agent yet, but they were like close, but they didn't quite know what they didn't know. And I
Right.
would read these books and I knew what they needed. And it was so fun to have the answers and to be able to help people out and work with people that were really talented. And it just so happened that that year, oh, we'll tell the real, bald, honest truth here. It happened that that year my tortoise projects fell through because tortoise biology is a weird contract work kind of thing. And sometimes there's work and sometimes there's not. And we ran out of jobs and we didn't have any money. And my husband and I were both doing it. So we really didn't have any money.
Mm.
And it was right after Pitch Wars, and there were all these people out there with books, and I could only pick one of them. You know, so many of them didn't get in, and there were all these books that I knew how to help them. So I just hung up my shingle as an editor, and I said, "Hey, you guys, you know, if you want help, I'm here." And nowadays, everybody's hanging out their shingle as a freelance editor, and that would be considered like more predatory to like be like, "Oh, come buy editing because you didn't get into the contest to get it for free." But back then,
Mm.
people were just dying for answers. They just wanted
Yeah.
help, you know, and I was charging dirt cheap prices. And so I just took on all the editing and like went straight from being a tortoise biologist to being an editor. And I had so many clients because there were so many people that wanted help and knew me from being a Pitch Wars editor. And I just loved being able to help people. And so many of them got agents, and it's been really fun to see some of their books come out. And so, yeah, that's how I got into book coaching and editing. That's how I got into editing. And then book coaching was kind of a process of figuring out how to make more of that mentorship aspect come into it.
Okay.
Because with editing, it's a little bit less satisfying where they give you a book, you tell them what to do with it to make it better, and then you send them on your way. And I wanted kind of more of the mentoring aspect where I could answer people's questions about publishing. I could help them figure
Right.
out about query letters. You know, I could like encourage them and get them to write more because, man, I am the best at talking people into writing books. Like I can get people so excited to write books, sometimes to my detriment when they have no time to write books and I talk them into it anyway. But I wanted more of that ongoing process with
Yeah.
my clients. And so I added book coaching to my editing so that I could do that. And I found that you get intensely better results. Basically, what would how would you learn better if you went to college or if somebody just gave you all the books from college? You know, like
Oh,
learning is an iterative process where you
right.
need to learn one thing, layer something else on top of it, layer something else on top of it. Even when
Right.
you're careful not to make your edit letters overwhelming, you know, you're still giving them all the info at once. And so
Yeah.
it's much easier as a coach to be able to just bring people up one step at a time and only work on one technique at a time, and to be able to build one-on-one classes for stuff that you can tell they're really strong in this area but they need more help in this area, you know, stuff like that. And
Right.
I just love helping people get agents. I've been helping people get agents for like 9
So
years now because I just love that area of it.
let's break it down. A an editor, uh, if I were to employ an editor, I have hopefully a finished manuscript that I need feedback on. That someone who can help me see the weaknesses, the holes in my manuscript that I can no longer see, because we know that once your eyes have been over a manuscript, was it 3 or 4 times? I forget, but I've heard people quote it before that then your brain just quits seeing the problem after that. You just can't see it anymore because
Or you
it's
don't
not
know what the problem is in the first
or
place. You
you
know, I run in
right,
like here's the problem with writing in America. We don't have a standardized way to teach commercial fiction writing. Even MFAs, very few
yeah,
MFAs actually address commercial fiction writing. A lot of them are more academic focused or they're more literary focused. Like there's
right,
very few that specialize in commercial fiction writing. And so there's
yeah.
just not very many objective ways
And
to get that training.
and
Whereas
there's
if
a
you wanted to be a
weird
lawyer, you could just go to law school.
right, and there's a weird thing with, like, MFA programs uh, and the type of fiction that they promote. It's almost a badge of honor to write something that doesn't sell. Um, and like, if you're selling something, you're obviously not any good. And like, that is such a twisted thing to put into the brains of people that are
There's a
trying to
lot of
get their
variation
work read.
in
It's so
MFA
weird.
programs. Some of the worst books I've ever read were from people with master's degrees in writing, to be
Right.
honest with you. And
Yeah.
I don't think all MFA programs are bad. I just think there's a lot of variation in the style, the type, the you know what they're teaching, the instruction, that kind of thing. They're focused, like you said, if they're really focused on literary stuff, or
Yeah.
you know,
I don't it's so weird. So an editor, because we don't have a good way to teach people about fiction that sells and what's the best way to do it. We have editors who then um, try to help you fix the problems and hopefully educate you so that when you write your next book, you have some more tools in your toolbox to rely on.
So it's like you were saying, your eyes glaze over and you just can't see it anymore. It's not
Right.
just that, it's things that you didn't know in the first place.
Right.
Last week I was breaking down how to write an emotional arc of change for a
Hmm.
client. And it's like they had the character doing the external stuff. They started out one way and went through a journey and they kind of changed, but you never saw any of the internal element, what that meant to them, why they were like that in the first place, how their emotions and their thoughts and their interpretations of their world changed in order to produce those external actions that changed, right? And so I was breaking down the difference between an external arc and an internal emotional arc, and what you need to know in order to do one, and how you break it up into little pieces and sprinkle it into your book to show the progression, and then how you resolve it in the end. And if you've never heard it broken down like that and you've read a
Hmm.
ton of books, you may have kind of absorbed some pieces of that, but you're like somebody who's trying to build a house because they've seen a house. And so they're trying to build a house shaped thing, but nobody's ever taught them about the foundation. They've never learned about framing. They don't know how drywall and framing interact. You know what I mean? Like you're
Yeah.
just trying to make a house shaped thing. You're going to end up with something, but it's so much easier if I can like tell you that you start with the foundation and then you go to the framing and then you go to the sheetrock. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
It's just
So
faster. That's what people don't know about editors. It just makes you so much faster and everything's so much easier. And instead of
yeah.
just like guessing and trial and erroring, you have somebody that knows and can articulate how to do it.
Right. So what is the difference in an editor and a book coach? What fundamentally what are editors and book coaches trying to give to the writer? Like each of these people are sitting in their position. What are they what service are they offering to the writer? We'll just
Yeah,
start
so
there.
most of editing is they're taking a completed project and
Yeah.
giving you feedback on the product.
Right.
And a book coach can be any of the nebulous space before that
Okay.
in getting you to writing a book or revising it once you're done, but you don't have to go to them only at that one point in time when you have a finished product, right? And the way that people break down their coaching services, it varies all over the map. But the way I would put it to you is just like that. Like I can be there with you and help you plan the book and come up with the idea. I can be there with you and give you feedback as you're writing. So when you're learning stuff, you're applying it now. You're planning into your book now. You're not waiting till you have 400 pages that you now need to rewrite to
Right.
include that stuff that you just learned. It's so much easier, you guys. Uh, Plus, it's just so much more fun, honestly. Like, I don't put this on my business cards, but it's so much more fun to write when you have somebody excited for the next chapter who knows who your characters are. You're talking to your
Right.
husband, and he's like, "Who's Jenny again? What's she do? Does she drive the tractor?" He's trying to follow up. He can't remember you guys. But it's just so much more fun. Like, I'll give you an example. I started writing books, and I didn't know any writers. Not, I live in Idaho. We have more potatoes than writers. I knew zero writers. And so I just wrote by myself with no feedback, no learning, no teaching, no nothing. I wrote 3 books by myself and it took me 10 years. And then when I started getting beta readers and other writers that could, like, from the fan fiction world, I met them in the fan fiction world where we could trade chapters back and forth and be excited about each other's stuff. Then I
Yeah.
wrote 3 books in 9 months. Like, and it wasn't that they were pushing me like, Michelle, write faster. They were just excited about my piece. And like that
Right.
creative collaboration just lit me up. And I was so excited and I didn't want to do anything else. And so it made me faster just even without trying.
Yeah. Um I used to write a column for our local newspaper for years, and before I wrote my first novel, and I also wrote in several other venues, and I threatened for years that I was going to write a novel, and my wife used to make jokes that I was always threatening to write a novel, and I finally wrote my first novel, but I didn't know anything about novel writing. I was a writer. I could get a point across. I knew, how to establish a thesis and to, get to the point and reiterate that and all of that stuff. Um, so it wasn't that I didn't know how to write. But then I wrote my first novel and it was okay. But after that, the more I learned about the process and working with editors, writing more, telling different stories, I learned so much that I look back on that first novel and I go, you know, I I wish I would have been able to get all of the feedback that I got later during the process of writing that book. It would have made the book so much better. It would have made me as a writer so much better. And
I
what I'm
found
hearing from you is that's the role of a book coach to help you to kind of vet out all of the things that you don't know to help solidify them while you're writing so that it can be the best that it can be.
Yeah, and your first book is still never going to be as good as your 10th book, just because
Yeah.
a book is a piece with a lot of variables in it. And so you need to get better and better at juggling so many different variables at once. But I've been lucky enough to start several writers from their very first book in coaching with me. And what I've determined from watching them is it's about roughly 3 books worth of practice. Like I
Mhm.
can get them within 1 book to where they would be after about 3 practice books. And for some people, that's more. So I've seen some people who can write 6, 12 practice books, not be where my clients are after 1 book. But
Yeah.
it's just enormously faster and it's less frustrating. And I learned almost everything from beta readers and blogs. I mean, I had Googled myself blind, taken online classes and just reading blogs and learning that way. And it's slow. When I started out, I was working for a book coaching company. They were the first ones to even tell me that book coaching was a thing. And I was like, this is the best idea ever. Because before I was a tortoise biologist, I was in psychology for 10 years. And so a book coach is a perfect combination of a therapist and an editor. And I was like, those are my skills. You mash them together and you make a book coach. Like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I was working for Author Accelerator as a book coach. And plug for them, by the way, they teach people how to be book coaches. So when I first started working with them, we talked about how there was no good place for people to learn how to write, and there's no good place for people to learn how to edit. I
Right.
have clients who are big five editors, and nobody ever really taught them. They just kind of throw them in and say, edit this book. You know what I mean? They don't stop and like for 6 months be like, this is how you do it. They just let them do it.
Right.
Which is crazy. So Author Accelerator now trains people how to be book coaches and editors, which is great. It's so wonderful to learn that. And like, how do you write your feedback and things like that? But when I first started working with them, I was building a pitch track class with their founder, Jenny Nash. And I was
Mhm.
like, I'm so annoyed at this class because it took me 12 years to bang my way around trial and error to all of the information that we're putting into this class that people can like learn in a few days. And it was just so frustrating to me to see how long it took me to get to that same spot. And then I get mad because I go on social media and people talk bad about freelance editors a lot. They're like, oh, you can learn everything for free. You don't need to be paying people to do stuff, which is true. You can learn things for free. It's a lot
Sure.
slower. And like you can get beta readers to read your stuff, and they are at all different levels of experience. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? And like, if you're in a kindergarten class, do you want to learn how to read from your other kindergartners, or do you want to learn from the teacher who already knows how to read? Like in
Yeah.
every other profession, we have colleges, we have training programs, we have apprenticeships. And in writing is the only place where we laugh at people for paying professionals to teach them instead of learning on
Right.
their, like, you never tell a plumber, like, just go out and figure it out for free. You're going to be a great plumber. You don't need to talk to any
Right.
other
Go
plumbers,
watch some YouTube videos. Sure, it'll be fine.
Everybody listening to this podcast right now has a husband who's exploded the toilet trying to learn plumbing from YouTube. That's good.
Yeah. We got a great comment from B. I'm going to pop up on the screen here. Feedback is like drinking an energy drink to get you fired up to write. No matter if it's good or bad feedback, at least to me, bad feedback makes me think. And B, I think that's a great way to look at it. That bad feedback. A lot of times, even if the feedback stinks, there might be something I could pull from it. At least let me pause long enough to consider what they said, and then it's up to me to decide if they're right or not. But at least I took the time to consider. So that's a great outlook on that.
Yeah, I think B takes feedback really well. I think I spend a lot
Right.
of time as an editor trying to craft feedback in a way that allows people to take it on board without feeling emotionally attacked. Because a
Right.
lot of people take it so personally when you ask them to change anything about their book. I take it personally. Like, it's so personal,
Yeah.
fiction writing. So I do spend a lot of time getting people to the place where they can emotionally see that I get what they're trying to do, and I love a lot of the things that they're trying to do, and just like help them get the other pieces that they're not quite seeing yet up to the same level. I
Right.
think Dee should be really happy that she's so good at taking feedback just on her own.
B said took a lot of therapy to get here.
Therapy helps. It helps.
Hey,
Plus, if you've been to therapy, you know how to write an emotional arc, because like
there you
secretly
go.
that's what all the characters are going through, is the same arc of progress that you go through with therapy, with realizing how your past impacted you, realizing how you drew false assumptions from it that
Yeah,
then led your behavior to be behavior that didn't suit you, and then figure out how to draw new assumptions that serve your behavior better.
yeah. Um, a lot of newer authors, maybe people who haven't had enough experience working with an editor, or maybe have had a bad experience working with an editor, are afraid that the editor is going to alter what they said or how they're afraid that they're going to edit their voice away. That you know I've never met anyone who got into writing because they didn't feel like they had something to say. Like everyone feels like they have a story to tell, whether it's some emotional journey that they want to you know carry someone on, or they have some outlook on culture in general that they feel like is a unique insight that they want to share. Like everyone gets into it because they feel like they have something to say. Whether you're writing for pure entertainment or you feel like there's another purpose to your writing, everyone thinks they have something to say. And there a lot of times people are afraid that an editor is going to squash that unique thing that they have. Um, what about book coaches? If a new author or someone that has not had a good experience, um, how will a book coach help them to be a better writer, not shape them into the writer that the coach wants them to be? So if we just kind of play
That's
devil
a
for a minute.
Gosh, I have like 9 different answers to that
Okay.
question. There's a lot of different directions you can take it. First of all, it's a little bit easier with a book coach than an editor because you have more back and forth. So instead of getting your edit letter, you can say, and being like, oh, well, she was taking it this way and I wanted to take it this way. If you've got a book coach, she starts taking it this way and you can say, no, this was supposed to be about giraffes. Let's focus on the giraffes. And they can be like, oh, I get it now. Let's focus on the giraffes. But like even as an editor, when I'm doing a one-off edit letter, because I still do both, I do editing and coaching. I always try to figure out what the most important thing is, or what they were really trying to do, what the soul of the book is, and
Mhm.
demonstrate in my edit letter that I get that. Because as an editor, I'm going to get so much more buy-in to my feedback if they realize that I know what they were
Yeah.
trying to do, even if they didn't get there. Even if any
Right.
other reader would have totally missed it. Like, I want them to know that I see it, so that when I give them feedback, they'll be like, oh, she's not trying to change me. She knows that I was trying to get to Nebraska. She's just showing me a different road to get there. You know what I
Right.
mean? And then also, as a book coach, I actually help people figure out a lot of what the soul of their book is. I think people feel it and they're not good at articulating it. So, for instance, right now, or they don't know until the end of the book, which is, even with a book coach, that's part of the discovery process, and that's fine. But right now, I'm planning a new book with one of my new coaching clients, and it's torturing me because it looks like such a good book, and she hasn't written it yet, and she's just teasing me every time she sends me a new outline. But we're not just going through the process of what's going to happen in the book. This week we stopped and said, what's the point of your book? What drew you to this idea in the first place? What do you love about this? And it's funny to me how often people will start out with something that drew them that they really loved, and then they
Mhm.
get so sidetracked by the what happens. What happens in this book? What are the steps A, B, and C, that they get so off track that by the end of the book, they're like, oh, yeah, it was supposed to be about giraffes in the beginning. I totally forgot about giraffes. You know what I mean? And after chapter 3, there's not even any more giraffes in it. And so through my first 5 or 10 books that I wrote myself, that was a problem that I had a lot, where I would start here and I would end up over here. And it was a book-shaped thing and it had a story, but it wasn't necessarily the story I'd started out telling.
Right.
And Story Genius by Lisa Cron actually helped me a lot with different ways to articulate and hone in on the heart of my story and what I really wanted to say with it and what was important to me about it, so that I could make sure that the final draft still included that. And then also, something that can really help you with figuring out what's important to you about your story is bad feedback. Because as soon as somebody says, I hate giraffes, these should all be walruses, you're like, you know what? I love giraffes. I love my giraffes, and I'm not taking them out for a walrus, and I hate you, and I hate your face. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
So bad feedback can help you figure out what is really important to you about your book. And you don't get 90 darlings. You have
Right.
to pick and choose what's going to be important to you to focus on in the book, or it's just going to be too all over the place. But if you have an editor that doesn't get your book, sometimes you need to try another editor. Sometimes you need to state up front what it is about it that you don't want to change or that you don't care about. I spend a lot of time therapizing people through the process of letting go of their ly adverbs, doing everything gently, smoothly, softly. Like, I think a lot of people start out thinking this is the way that I write, and
Yeah.
they don't realize that I can give them a lot of tools that aren't as repetitive to do the same things.
Right.
But ly adverbs are one area where I think people feel like editors are trying to change their voice and they don't want to, or they like have a lot of description and they love that about their writing, but the editor's like, you can't talk about what the table looks like for 3 pages. And they're like, but I'm really good at saying what the table looks like. And you're like, what if you gave me 2 amazing sentences about the table? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, Robert Jordan in The Wheel of Time one time described someone's buttons for 3 pages.
Yeah, one of my friends was just telling me about one of the old Russian novelists that's super famous, and how he would talk about what everybody ate for breakfast for like 7 pages at a time. We have word processors now, people. Like, we
Right.
all got trained in high school. They were like, these are the classics. This is the best of the best. And then they showed you this crap that was published serially, chapter by chapter, where they're paid by the word, and they
Yep.
didn't have a word processor, and they were doing all their editing, crossing out with a quill. They didn't even have whiteout, you guys. Like, why
Right.
are we modeling our books on these people who did not have the tools to write well? Like,
Yeah.
I just met somebody the other day, my tattoo artist actually, who told me she'd just gotten into writing. And I was like, girl, you got into reading at just the right time, because books are getting better and better and better all the time. As soon as we got
Oh
word
yeah.
processing, they started on a sharp upward trajectory of increasing quality.
Oh
And
yeah.
just the last few years, it's even gotten sharper. So many people are writing, they're coming up with amazing stuff.
Well, and not that there aren't great things to learn from Russian literature right around the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, but there's a lot of depressed people then, and it may not be the best reading experience for everyone. Just saying. Just saying.
Just saying. Not saying the
Yeah.
classics don't have something in there, but
Yeah.
prose and pacing is 2 things that you may
Right.
not want to learn from them.
Right. Okay, here's a question I have for you, Michelle. I can see um, if you're the kind of writer who's very structured and you're a planner and you have a plan that you work out in your pre-writing and then you go by your plan in your daily writing or your weekly writing, whatever. I can see that a book coach can see that plan and she can point out weaknesses and provide motivation in all the right places. I can see where all of that would be a wonderful symbiotic relationship. But what if you're the kind of writer who enjoys the chaos a little bit and likes to live in the dark, murky waters of pantsing? And
Oh, I love
they
that question.
so, how does a book coach, how does the relationship between writer and book coach work in that situation where, you know, the story may change tomorrow when I sit down in the chair? I don't know because I just like to live in that, you know, chaos.
That's a great question, Hank, and I'm glad you asked that, because nobody's ever asked me that before. And it's something that's an intrinsic part of my practice that I don't talk about in public very often because it doesn't occur to me to mention it.
Yeah.
Um, but I have a lot of different kinds of clients, and I work with people on the full spectrum from pantser to plotter. Maybe not at the very first part of the spectrum where it's like pantser to the level of like they don't know the next sentence that's coming out of their mouth. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, at that level, you can't really work with them very much as a book coach. You can
Yeah.
teach, you're a little bit more coming up behind, like an editor, where you can teach craft principles and tactics and stuff. It's
Yeah.
already too late because they're writing forward. But everyone else I work with, and the thing is, I'm not stupid. I know the same thing isn't going to work for all my clients, because once you've had more than one client, you
Yeah.
realize this for yourself. You're like, this worked great with client number one. I'm going to put this client number two on their program. And then they shut down and they stop writing, and they have excuses for you every week on why they don't have any pages. And you're like, gosh, this is weird. What's going on? You know, you realize very quickly that you can't do the same thing with different clients. Like, one of my clients and I went through and made a spreadsheet week by week of the entire year and her word count goals. We built in breaks, we built in revising time, we built in promotion time for her books after they were published. We built in time for her to learn different things about publishing. We did it for the whole year. If I did that for my Tuesday client, her head would fly off of her body. You know what I mean? She would never do
Mhm.
anything ever again. And so the way that I do it is, it's pretty, I won't tell you how I work with a plotter because that's pretty easy to figure out, right? With a pantser, I try to get them, because I was a pantser.
Mhm.
Still am a pantser. I really hate planning out every scene. Like, that's just no
Yeah.
fun. And then kind of sucks the joy out of it for me. But I try to get something before I start. What I really
Yeah.
try to do is, I want to know my misbeliefs, you know, the thing that's driving the character's behavior, the wrongful belief that's driving their behavior. And I take that and I go, okay, how would that climax, right? Like, once I have an external plot that's going to push on that misbelief and force them to confront it,
Mhm.
how do I climax it? And then I go back from the climax to the mid-act reversal. And I say, what's something big that can happen at the midpoint of the book so that I'm not just flailing around in that murky middle, right?
Mhm.
And once I've got the mid-book reversal, I have something that after I've gotten done with all the setup, I have something that I'm driving toward. And then after it's happened, I have something that I'm reacting to. So there's never a large part of the book where I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I
Mhm.
think people really screw themselves over with that 3-act structure where they're done with the setup, they're not to the climax, and now they just got to do stuff. And they don't know what the stuff is.
Right.
The mid-book reversal is amazing for that. So I work with my clients to get at least that much. And then we start working really loosely on quarters. You know, I just broke that book roughly into quarters. Okay, so what kind of stuff is going to happen in the second quarter? How are we going to be raising the stakes and escalating the tension and the conflict and the problems in the third quarter? Because that third quarter is really key. And we just get some basic ideas. I love to have people just throw out as many scene ideas as they can in the brainstorming phase. And later we might stack 5 of those scene ideas together and make it one scene. Or we might take a scene and it's like, oh, well, there'd be this really cute thing where they're washing the car with banana peels. Well, why don't we use that for the scene where she finds out that her mom is actually a goose? You know what I mean? You marry
Right.
structure with inspiration. And then I work with them as they're going along. So as a pantser, what you do is you write a little bit and then you think a little bit, and then you write a little bit and then you think a little bit. You can do that with
Mhm.
a book coach. You can do it a lot better with a book coach than you can do it on your own. And so we can bounce ideas back and forth off of each other. We can, you know, if we're getting through and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's been way too many date scenes. We need to like move this forward a step. We're getting, like, almost every writer will get stuck in one
Yeah.
area of the book where they're not writing, but they keep writing, they keep staying in the same beat for too long.
Mhm.
I'm guilty of this. Almost everybody is guilty of this. And so a book coach can catch you when you're like, oh, you've written 4 date scenes and you only need one. We need to move on to something else, that kind of thing. So I work more loosely with my pantser people, and
Mhm.
I try to really support their inspiration, because I found the hard way, when you try to make pantsers plot, it kills the magic and they stop writing. But if you get a pantser to plot a little bit and to think ahead a little bit, like, you
Yeah.
can't tell me that when you start the book with a conflict that you can't think of at least 3 ways to climax it. If you can't think of 3 ways to climax it, maybe don't start that book, because you're going to paint
Right.
yourself into a corner. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
You want to have some general idea and be thinking about that stuff. And maybe you have a better idea later and we change it. That's fine. But I just work with them more loosely. And even with my plotters, we update the outline as we're going along. And I don't want to give the impression that you can only work with a book coach until you have your finished piece. Like, I started one of my clients last year where she had the finished book. I did an edit on it, and then we started coaching, working on the revision together. I built her a bunch of one-on-one classes. I was like, this is where I think you need more, you need to build up your knowledge base before you start
Mhm.
writing. And so I built her some one-on-one classes just for specifically what she needed. And then we went over her giant fantasy book outline a whole bunch of times and wrote a new outline. And then she started sending me revised pages as she rewrote the book. And some of them were adapted chapters, some of them were all new chapters. She cut a bunch of stuff, she added a bunch of stuff. I mean, it was a huge revision. She's done incredibly well. But you can, as a book coach, you can work in the planning phase, you can work in the writing phase, you can work in the revising phase. If I had just like one tip to give people on how to make
Yeah.
editing cheaper for them, I would say always run your outline by an editor before you start writing. Like, do a book planning package with a book coach like I do, or just at the very least run your book plan, your book idea past an editor and say, troubleshoot this for me, because it's really sad. I get all the time these agent ready packages where I'm looking at people's query letter and I look at their synopsis and I know everything that's wrong with the book. And it's too late because they already wrote the book and they are about to query for agents and they really don't want to stop and rewrite their book right now. But I can see all the potholes in it, you
Right.
know?
Right. Um, I started out as a hardcore pantser, but I always know the ending of my book before I begin. I always know where I'm going. So, and even though I'm more of a planner now, I still like to have to leave room to kind of let the story to let new ideas kind of come into it, but I always know where I'm going. There's never any chance I'm just going to get completely off the rails because I don't know where I'm going. I know where I'm going. Just how I get there may change a little bit. But one thing that was a big turning point for me was learning to outline as I go. So even as a pantser, I would take notes of what I had already written. That way I don't get 80,000 words into something and then really not know what's going on because I've kind of lost the plot along the way. By kind of documenting it as I write it, which is kind of a backwards way of outlining, but at least you can stay on track because you see where you've been. So even though I don't necessarily know where I'm going per se tomorrow, at least I know what needs to be done because I can see what's already been done. And I found that by introducing kind of that way of thinking to some pantsers, that helps them to not get kind of lost in the weeds, of getting in that murky middle where everything kind of falls apart for a lot of people.
You're describing pretty close to the exact procedure that I use with my pantser clients, where you try to figure out, and some people you can't figure out the ending right when you start, but at least try, like at least try to start thinking about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, trying to know the ending or the climax and the mid-book reversal, just the big pieces like that, and then outlining as far as you can ahead, just like knowing a few chapters ahead and then, stopping to do that periodically as you go through the book. That's usually what we
Yeah.
do.
My camera just went out of focus for some reason. I don't know
I know.
what's
I
going on
noticed
with it.
that. You're going in and out. It's weird.
I don't know. I don't know. But Michelle, this is we're an hour in and we should probably land this. If folks are if they've never worked with a book coach before, what is the what should be the process that they look for in finding a book coach, and what can they expect? And at what point in the process would you like for them to start thinking about coaching?
Oh my God. If I can, I love to get my hands on a person as early as they can. Like I said, I've started several writers with their very first book in coaching.
Yeah.
It is the easiest and lowest stress way to learn. Um, but until last year, I literally had nowhere to point people when they wanted a book coach other than myself. I was like, I
Yeah.
don't know where you look. I'm sorry. Other than Googling book coach, like you're just stuck. And now I
Yeah.
have two places to send people, which is really great. So when you're starting to work with a book coach, I always recommend sending them as much as you can about your book idea. If you have a full description, that's great. If you're like, I just want to write a book about apples and a pair of scissors and they fall in love and they go and live in a dumpster, say that, that's fine. And then give them some sample pages. I hate it when people want to work with me and they don't have any sample pages. Even if you just have a few pages of like, that you've thought that you've started your book or your writing of your story, like I want to see something. If you've not written a sentence, like, okay, I did say I wanted you early in the process, but it's so much more helpful if I can see what you're doing. Like I get guys all the time that think that they've written a romance because they have a love story in their book, and there are a lot of genres that have love stories in them, not just romance. And I
Sure.
specialize in romance, fantasy, and young adult. And so all the time I'll read sample pages and be like, this is a great book. It's a thriller. You should get a different coach. Like I can work on thriller and suspense, but like if we're talking police procedural or like a heavy duty mystery or hard boiled
Yeah.
sci-fi, like those stuff, I don't work on. So having a few sample pages is really helpful for the coach and for you, and they can immediately start spotting like, okay, we can work on this and this. They're really good at this and this already. We don't need to talk about this. My website is sanctuaryeditorial.com. I did a rebrand because I wanted to kind of I wanted to encapsulate the feeling of my coaching services in my
Mhm.
logo and my name. So I've got this beautiful, like, overhanging tree, and called it Sanctuary because I wanted it to be a place where people felt safe and supported and
Yeah.
happy, and like not like I'm up there with a red pen judging them. That's really not my style. But it was a great time to do this podcast because I've been full on book coach clients for years. Like I'm always full because I don't have that many spots, but I actually have a summer spot that I'm trying to fill right now where one of my clients is off revising. And it's really fun. I do mostly long-term coaching with
Okay.
clients. Like I'll stick with them as long as they want, and then they never want to leave because once you realize how fun it is to write with somebody reading along with you, you don't ever want to do it on your own again.
Right.
Um, but it's also really fun to do these seasonal things where you're like, you know what? I really want to refocus on my writing. I want to get to the next step. Maybe you've plateaued or maybe you're not writing as much as you want, but you can work with somebody to like kind of supercharge you and your writing and your skills all at once. Maybe you just go in and you're like, you know what? I suck at writing dialogue. Let's do an intensive on dialogue. Or I know this book has something wrong with it, but I don't know what. Let's dig into this book. Or like I got a book coach when I had this really annoying kind of writer's block where I wasn't not writing. I was
Yeah.
writing, but I threw away everything I wrote for like a
Mm,
year because I
yeah.
hated it. Everything I wrote, I hated. And so I had to get a book coach to knock me out of that spiral. That was terrible. Do you want me to give people my two references for where to find a book coach? If
Please.
Because I'm going to be full in 5 more seconds, but if
Pl-
there's somebody
Please.
out there looking for a summer session of coaching, I'm here for it. But only in romance, fantasy, young adult, a little bit
Okay.
of suspense and thriller, but I don't do middle grade or picture books.
Okay.
But if you're looking for a book coach and I'm full, or you want somebody in a genre that I don't take, your first place to look is readsy.com.
Hmm.
Readsy is like the Airbnb app of editors, and it's
Right.
where all of the big five editors who have burned out have gone to open their freelance careers. So they have a ton of people with really fancy resumes. Um, and don't discount the people that haven't worked for the big five, though. Sometimes self taught freelance editors are actually better at articulating feedback than big five former editors. But they do have a lot of people with actual credentials on Readsy, which is nice. And you can search by genre. They have Readsy Live, which is like amazing YouTube videos of every writing class you ever want for free. And you can search for book coaches. As of last year, they opened up to book coaching as well as editing. And I'm not kidding you. The flood of people out there who want support, who've been threatening to write a novel, and they
Yeah.
don't know where to start. Like it's just been amazing. The response. So you can search book coaching on Readsy, and then the other place is Author Accelerator. Like I said, they don't provide book coaching anymore. They train book coaches, but they have a book coach matching service where you can be matched with a certified book coach. So you get with somebody that they've had actual training, not just in writing, because I'm an author, I've got 9 books out. But what I've learned from Pitch Wars and other mentoring projects is like, not every person who can write knows how to teach writing. Like
Hmm.
they aren't necessarily good at breaking down the problems with a book and articulating them. Those are two different skill sets.
Right. Right.
So when you get matched with an author accelerator certified coach, at least you have somebody who has some formal training in how to edit, which is nice. So if you look at their website, they have a match me service for book coaches, which is cool. And I'm a certified coach through them. That's where I met Abby, actually, who linked me up with you for this podcast.
Perfect. Perfect. And the link for your services. What's the site for there?
It's sanctuaryeditorial.com. And then my books are under michellehazenbooks.com. Hazen with a Z, like zebra.
Okay. Perfect. I'll link those up in the show notes to make it easy for folks to find you as well.
Yeah,
Michelle, this
because
has
my
been
published books are romance, but I'm coming out
okay.
with a nonfiction book about how to write sex scenes this year. So that's going to be my first writing craft book. And I'm really looking forward to sharing that because it turned out I had a whole lot of useful things to say about how to write sex scenes.
And will you be indie publishing? And I'm assuming that will probably turn into a series if that does well, that maybe there are different aspects of the craft that you'll write books on.
I'm thinking about it. There's a paired one that I could do on writing fight scenes because
Yeah.
those are very similar. And I'm very good at writing fight scenes and breaking down how to write fight scenes. I don't know in general how many craft books I'm going to end up doing. I think it's going to mostly depend on my interest because the longer you're an editor, the more you just end up making classes for everything. And then those can grow into full nonfiction books. But sex scenes was the one where I run into people all the time that want to write them and are intimidated and don't know how, or they don't know how to make them good. You know, you're like, well, what do other people think is sexy? I don't know. And I can break down how to write a good sex scene in just an excruciating amount of detail. Like I can make it just objectively very clear what you need
Right.
to do. And so that's helpful for people.
Understood. MichelleHazenBooks.com and SanctuaryEditorial.com. Go look up Michelle if you're looking for a book coach and need some help this summer. She's got a slot available. Go hit her up and let her know that you heard about her on the Storycraft Cafe podcast. Michelle, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Hank. You asked really good questions. I feel like we could do 3 hours of this and very easily talk about all kinds of different book coaching things.
Absolutely. Will you come back and chat with us again?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. The chat was lively as always. We love seeing all of you guys here. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, B. Thank you, Jasmine. Everyone else in the chat. Thanks for joining us, and join us tomorrow for Writing Sprint Wednesdays here on the same channel. Thanks, and we'll see you guys later.